I know, it's a button. A real button. And yet the camera control is arguably the biggest highlight of the iPhone 16 Pro. It feels like a lot to talk so much about one singular button, but this button represents a lot more than just camera control. There's also camera updates to the iPhone 16 Pro, there's some audio improvements, and the screen's also bigger. And there's even Apple Intelligence on the horizon. Of course, we're not going to be able to delve into that in this review because Apple Intelligence is still in a beta form and will only be available to everyone in October. So for now, I'm going to focus my review of the iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max on camera control, the 48 megapixel fusion cameras here, as well as any special features that go into the phones. We'll of course also talk about its battery life and other details about its performance. And also just bear in mind that we're shooting this video on Monday, September 16th. By the time you're watching this video, we will have had at least 2 more days to get our full written review on the website, so there might be more testing insight there. So head on over to Engadget.com to check all of that out. So much ado about buttons, I guess, and I'm a glutton for buttons. I can make all the jokes about buttons all day, but really what stands out about the iPhone 16 Pro over the iPhone 15 Pro is the addition of the camera control button. It's supposed to mimic the experience you get on a DSLR. So eventually, at some point, you're gonna be able to half press on the camera control key and use it to lock focus on your subject. For now, like many other things on the iPhone 16 Pro, this feature is not available and we will have to wait till a later date to test that feature out. What you do have here is the button itself, which to clear up anything, this is a real physical mechanical button. It is actually going into the frame. What uses force touch on the sensor is the two-step or the half-step situation that's basically mimicking the DSLR experience. When you're simulating a press on the button, the sensor will give you haptic feedback to let you know that, hey, I registered that you're sort of fake pushing me, and will bring up a sub-menu that lets you adjust things by swiping on the sensor. Then a full press will either launch the app from any page on the phone, or when you're already in the camera, a full press will take a photo, and a long press will actually start recording a video. Now that I've got the basics out of the way, how is it actually to use this thing? Well, first of all, I think the placement could be better. The first thing some people that I've handed this phone to noticed was that it's not really situated where you would naturally gravitate towards to take a photo. It could be a little lower down the edge of the iPhone 16 Pro and the Pro Max. Even when you're holding it in vertical orientation to take a selfie, it may feel initially like a better place for your thumb, but when you're actually taking a picture, it just feels like it's a little out of reach. Now, Apple is clearly borrowing from some other phone makers here with the camera control. There's been Microsoft with the Lumia phones that had dedicated camera buttons, Sony with the Xperia phones, and not to mention the double-click hardware key shortcut on multitudes of Android phones out there that allowed you quick hardware-based access to your camera app, so that when you grab your phone out of your pocket, you're already ready to shoot. With the iPhone, that does the job. You don't have to rely on the lock screen shortcut anymore. A physical button is there for you to just press. I really love this. I love the quick access to whip out my phone and snap a photo. And I found myself doing that a lot. Whether it's someone who cut me in line and pissed me off, or it's a funny sign on the road, or maybe the expressway saying the Mahwah exit in New Jersey is just ahead, I found myself just whipping out the phone for any reason, more than I already was before, because it's so much easier now. However, if you're looking to make fine-tuned controls over your photos with the camera control, you might need to pause for a moment. This is because when using the camera with one hand and trying to swipe on the camera control, it's not really the most intuitive experience. You really have to find a way to balance the phone so that it's not falling out of your hands. And the way I've got it held up right now with my thumb on the bottom and 3 fingers kind of holding it down so that I can use my index finger to just swipe on the sensor is probably the most stable way. However, when you're in a hurry, to capture, say, a flying bird that's just zoomed overhead, you're not going to have time to get into position, press the button, and then swipe so that you're zooming all the way in to get that bird. And this sort of futzing around is just going to waste some time in precious moments. It's It's even worse when you're trying to use this to take a selfie. So if you've got it with one hand and your thumb is resting on the camera control, you want to switch over to say change up the exposure or just change the camera zoom. It's just, there's no good way to hold the phone and also swipe on the sensor at the same time. It's just, you're just gonna drop your phone. I also found myself accidentally swiping on the camera control even when I wasn't trying to use it to take a photo, and this would adjust things like the zoom level a few too many times. The good news is you can go into the settings to either disable or remap the camera control button to either bring up the magnifier or a QR code scanner or disable it completely, or you can also go into the accessibility settings to disable the swipe sensitivity area so it doesn't register anything when you move on that sensor anymore. If you're starting to get frustrated by this, like I had, you might want to consider turning it off. Now, if you're the sort of person that has the patience and the time to whip out your phone and swipe on the sensor, go through the different menus, and make all those changes on the fly, it is truly quite impressive to see that Apple is able to bring those edits to the viewfinder in real time. So if you're dragging on the exposure slider, or if you're making changes to the tone or photographic styles, you will see those changes applied to whatever you're pointing your camera at. The phone does run a little bit warmer than usual during those circumstances, but it's nothing that's felt very concerning in my brief time with the phone so far. I will point out that you don't have to use the camera control. Should that position of the button not be working for you, you can always go back to the volume down button to snap a photo. It's a bit more stable. You can also just touch the on-screen interface of the camera control sliders as opposed to swipe on the sensor, which again is just a bit more stable. So outside of the camera control button, there are some broader upgrades to the overall iPhone 16 Pro photography system. For example, the new 48 megapixel Fusion camera. What this does is use a second generation quad pixel sensor on the main 48 megapixel sensor to give you a much more responsive system here. So it'll be faster at capturing things, so what Apple is calling zero shutter lag is available here. You'll also be able to enable better macro photography as well as just improve performance at the 0.5x angle. One thing I will note here is that this year, between the Pro and the Pro Max models, both will get the 5x telephoto lens. So you don't have to choose the bigger handset just because you want a better zoom. You can actually opt for the smaller one now. But for reasons I will tell you later, you might want to stick with the bigger one. Other improvements that the 48 megapixel Fusion system brings is hugely improved slow-mo. So you can shoot at 4K 120 frames per second now. It is when I went into the playback options that I could choose between the 25% speed, 50% speed, 100%, or much slower, where I saw the slow, smooth movement of that adorable feature. 4K 120p is only available up to 3 times zoom, and that's kind of a mixture of the telephoto and the digital situation here. So I was able to get up close to a squirrel that was frantically running away on the fence, but not at the highest slow-mo quality ever. Of course, being able to shoot at such high quality and high frame rate will mean that your storage is an even more precious resource than ever, so just make sure you're not overdoing it yourself. But it is nice that you're able to choose the playback speed afterwards when you're sending it to, say, your friends or loved ones. They'll get a copy of that file in the correct playback speed. One feature I was super excited by when I saw it in the iPhone launch event was audio mix. So the iPhone 16 Pros have new studio level mics, 4 of them in fact, and using them, Apple is able to create something called audio mix, which is a new editing feature in the iPhone 16 Pro's video recording suite. Basically, when you go in to edit a video that you've shot now, you'll find a new option called Audio Mix, and in there you can choose from 4 different profiles. All of these profiles are powered by spatial audio, which is something that the base iPhone 16 and 16 Plus can also record, which means this feature is also available there. Now, the standard profile is standard spatial audio, but the other 3 have some software algorithms applied to them, so they sound a little bit different. In Frame is the first one, where Apple is trying to understand who's in the shot and then sort of isolate only their voices. It'll minimize the background noise. There's also a slider to the right of the scene that you can drag up or down to enhance or minimize the background sound.
Was wondering if you got my email yesterday. I just want to let you know that I'm really, busy this week. Was wondering if you got my email yesterday. I just want to let you know that I'm really, busy this week.
And then there's two more, studio and cinematic. Studio just makes it sound like you're in a relatively noise-free environment that has like a sound booth vibe to it. And then cinematic puts everything sort of front and center of the scene.
Really, busy this week. And I just have a lot of meetings to go for, but it's fine. We can make time to hang out and stuff. And I am totally yeah, tell me about it.
Now in my testing, I liked the studio version the most. It almost always gave me the best quality in voices, and cinematic was a close second. But in frame, which is the one that I thought I would want to use the most, just came out warped a lot of the time. This year, Apple also improved the photographic styles that it first introduced with the iPhone 13 series. So as a refresher, these are basically like filters that you apply on a picture before you take the photo. With the iPhone 16 series though, Apple has expanded it further. Not only are there a lot more photographic styles to choose from, but Apple has also fine-tuned its algorithm here so it better understands where your subject's skin is and then not have the color temperature or the filter overlays impact that. Which means if you are using a luminous filter or something that's way more saturated for the background, the person or the subject's skin can stay relatively human-like. You're supposed to be able to not only select a photographic style before you shoot, but also edit it after the fact because all of that information is captured in the file and the data there, so Apple is able to apply changes post-photo taking. There's also a new editing interface that allows you to use a sort of squarish touchpad and drag a slider around it to change up things like shadow or tone and warmth. It's a much easier way to edit a picture. The iPhone 16 Pro's main competitor is the Pixel 9 Pro, and of course Samsung's Galaxy S24 Plus. I mostly compared it against Google's flagship because that has long been the industry standard, honestly. I've always been a huge fan of Google Pixel's photography. So when I took the photos from both the Pixel 9 Pro and the iPhone 16 Pro and compared them on the same screen, in general I found that they're very close. But for some reason, the photos on the iPhone 16 Pro were just a little shakier and blurrier than the Pixel 9s, and I wonder what that reason is. I wonder if pressing a button on your device might introduce some shake. Now, I'm kind of speculating here, and of course you always have the option of pressing the on-screen shutter to eradicate that sort of shake at all. But in general, Google seems to be better at maybe post-processing and sharpening its images, especially in low light, to make something that looks a bit more clean. Google does struggle in low light with light leakages from buildings into the night sky, whereas Apple is better at avoiding that. However, again, the trade-off in shaky selfies at night, for example, or even moon photography, I think Google has a better imaging system here. Did you know that according to Gen Z people, at night, we no longer use night sight or night mode, it's just turn on the flash. And so I put the two phones, the iPhone 16 Pro and the Google Pixel 9 Pro, head to head in a flash face-off. Well, it's clear to me, based on the two selfies I took with flash on, that the Google Pixel 9 Pro has the softer and more friendly tone here, whereas the iPhone's flash just was a little too strong and seemed to wash me out. But everywhere else, they really seem a little neck and neck, especially when there's plenty of light in the environment. It will just boil down to your color preference. So I've spent a lot of time digging into the camera performance of the iPhone 16 Pro, and there are some other factors to base your decision on. Now, I must admit, when I was moving from the iPhone 14 Pro to the iPhone 15 Pro, I opted for the larger 15 Pro Max, partly because it has that 5x telephoto lens that I felt was crucial to my wildlife photography, but also because Apple had then changed the frame to use titanium, and therefore the 15 Pro Max was for once not a lethal weapon and could be used in my daily life. With the iPhone 16 Pro, I was very tempted to go back to the 16 Pro and not the Pro Max because for once there is camera parity. But the battery life is extremely disappointing. Now, going from a Pro Max to Pro, the first thing I noticed was that the Pro would not last the 1.5 days I usually got out of the 15 Pro Max. The 16 Pro would usually hit under 20% around 10 p.m., depending on how early I had started the day. For most days that I started at 7 a.m., I was getting that low battery warning around 10, and most times it couldn't last past 1 a.m., which is not that late. One time I started the day at 9:30 a.m. and was getting the low battery alert at 6:50 p.m. The night had barely started. I was getting home. I was having to be like Cinderella. So if you're used to the iPhone 15 or 14 Pro's battery life, you might still be okay with 16 Pro. However, if you're used to something lasting longer than a day, the 16 Pro might not be the best option. However, the 16 Pro Max does last very long. And so you might have to base your option as to which 16 Pro you're getting on your need to be near a wall outlet. Then there's things obviously like the screen size. The iPhone 16 Pro has slightly larger screens than their counterparts in the iPhone 15 Pro lineup. So we've got 6.3 and 6.9 inch displays now compared to 6.1 and 6.7 inches from before. Now the differential in their actual device sizes is minimal. You can barely tell that the iPhone 16 Pro Max is just a hair taller than the iPhone 15 Pro Max. But if you look really closely, you'll notice that the display of the iPhone 16 Pro Max is ever so slightly thinner than the 15 Pro Max is. Together with that slight growth in footprint, this gives way for a larger screen, which didn't feel that much more difficult to maneuver, at least on the 16 Pro. The 16 Pro Max might just be a little bit too big for my hands. Of course, there are a lot of other factors to consider when you're shopping for a new phone. So for all the full details on things like performance, like I said, or whether Apple Intelligence will be worth the upgrade, make sure you head on over to Engadget.com, where not only will we have the full written review, we'll also be updating when important features do eventually roll out later this year. For that and for more information, make sure you subscribe to Engadget. And until next time, keep pressing.